On a crisp night in November 1953, a nurse left the home of a friend she had been visiting. It was a nice enough night, so she decided to walk instead of getting the bus. Sadly, this decision would make her cross paths with her killer. Catherine Cooper, who was also known as Katie, was born in 1890 and grew up on a farm in Burren in Killamere in West Clare. She had three brothers and two sisters. Along with one of her sisters, Clara, she left for England. Here she trained as a nurse and worked at Kidderminster Hospital for 20 years. She then came back to Ireland just before World War II broke out. She moved to Limerick and worked as a senior nurse in Barrington's Hospital, which today is known as the Bon Secours Hospital. She was a home sister, so this basically meant that she went around to like sick patients, elderly, convalescents, that type of thing. So this meant that she was actually like a familiar face in the community. She was 5'1". She had grey hair and wore glasses. She was very active. On the 18th of November, Sister Katie finished her rounds visiting patients and then went home to change. The fashion conscious nurse wore a fawn coloured coat, a yellow beret with a matching scarf, gloves, and a little black skirt. She then got the bus out to Castle Troy to visit Alphonse Curtin, who was actually a retired matron from the hospital, and she had actually been Sister Katie's boss for 7 years. She arrived around 6:30 p.m. and left at about 9:25 p.m. Like I said, it was a nice night, so she decided to walk the 2-mile journey home. Just a few minutes later, only about 200 yards up on the Dublin Road, a man was walking behind Sister Katie. As she approached the old ruins at Newcastle, he grabbed her and pulled her into the grass verge. A couple, Mr. and Mrs. McCormick, were walking by the old ruins at about 9:55. They were just out on a walk, and they could hear noises, and they looked down and they could see a man on top of a woman, and muffled sounds. And at first they thought it was like a courting couple, that it was just a couple having some fun, and they continued walking. But Mrs. McCormick, just, it didn't sit right with her, and she really started to think that the sounds weren't of pleasure, but were actually muffled distress sounds. So they got back to the house shortly, within 5 minutes, and got their car and drove back. When they approached, they turned the car to shine the lights onto the grass, and the man hopped up and ran off, basically ran off down the road and up into up a ditch into a fence, and got through the fence. Their lights then showed the half-naked body of a woman lying on the ground. She wasn't moving, and so they thought that she was dead. So they actually drove off to get medical and spiritual aid. So they went off to get a doctor and priest. So the priest came, performed the last rites, Catholic Holy Ireland, and the doctor came and confirmed that she had died. But I have to wonder if those few minutes made a difference. Like, you don't know if she actually was dead when they first saw her and left, and we don't know how long it took for them to go off and come back. Anyway, the Gardaí were then notified and the investigation began. "30 yards down from where Catherine's body lay, her glasses were found, a tooth, her yellow beret, and another hat. Like I've done in a previous video, I'm going to put a timestamp along here, just for if anyone wants to skip the details of the assault. Catherine's skirt was pulled up. Her stockings and underwear were down by her ankles. An inquest would be carried out on the 20th, and that showed that there was blood oozing from Catherine's mouth. 5 teeth had been knocked out from her lower teeth. One of these had been found, obviously, further away. Another one was found in her stomach. Her chin was badly bruised up to her right cheek and to her eye. Her face was quite swollen. The same, her arms were both badly bruised, but her right arm and right elbow was extremely badly bruised. 3 ribs on her right side were also fractured, so we can obviously tell then that the right side of her body took the impact either from the fall or further struggles. Her lower lip was also badly cut. It was also oozing from her vagina. There was a 1/4 inch laceration inside the wall of her vagina. There was also superficial scrapes around the groin area, and there was bad bruising on the top of both her thighs. She had dried blood underneath her fingernails, so they could tell that, she had fought back, that there had been a struggle. The 65-year-old's death was caused by asphyxiation, and this was due to sods of blood-stained grass being shoved into her mouth. The hat that was found with Catherine's beret was like a Mounties hat, and in a tight-knit, close community, there was only one man who was known to wear this hat. At 2:15 a.m., 7 members of the police force knocked at 7 Moore's place. Joan Manning opened the door to 2 inspectors, 2 sergeants, 2 plainclothes detectives, and 1 uniformed Gardaí, and they were looking for her husband. They entered the bedroom and found Michael Manning in bed, sitting up, groggy. They asked Michael if he had been on the Dublin Road that night. He said he had. They then told him that a woman had been killed there. He obviously, first of all, denied knowing anything about it. He had scrapes on his hands, and he said that this was from his horse. But eventually, he lit a cigarette and said, "I'll tell you all, drink was the cause of it." Michael Manning was born in 1929. He would have been born into poverty, in a sense. I've seen it in a source being referred to, if you know the book Angela's Ashes, Limerick at that time, that's what we're dealing with here. He left school at 15, which wasn't unusual for the time, and he became a carter like his father. A carter or cartman is basically like, before cars would have been popular, it would have been a job where you transport goods and stuff like that. And I think they'd done a lot of work at the docks where they'd transport coal and stuff like that. In 1952, 24-year-old Michael married 22-year-old Joan. On the 18th of November, Michael finished his work early at 12:30 at the docks because he had to deliver bags of cement and lime to his dad in Castleconnor. But he decided not to do this task right away, and he actually went to a pub and had 4 pints of stout. He then went home at 2 p.m. to have dinner, and then after this, at about 3 o'clock, he left to go get the cement and lime. And then he went to different pubs. So he went to one pub called Kirby's, and he had 2 pints of stout here with another fella, O'Flaherty. They then went on to another pub up at the Pike. I don't know if that's the name of the pub. And again, he had 2 glasses of stout here. The 2 men then went on to a third pub, but were refused drink because they had too much at this stage. So they went back to one of the pubs that they had just been at. And by this point, the barman there then refused to serve them. Now, Michael was said to be a familiar face or very well known in the pubs. So for barmen who knew him, to refuse him, he must have been pretty drunk, because you weren't refusing people, especially people you knew. And he was going through, each time he was going to a pub, he was bringing his horse and cart and the cement and limes to each pub, and just obviously leaving it outside. But anyway, it started to get dark, so he headed with the supplies to his dad's and got there at around 7 p.m. After doing this, he then went off for another drink in a different pub in Annacoddy. And then after this, eventually he brought the horse and cart back to the field and the stable and stuff where he leaves them, which as far as I can tell, it was close to where his brother lived, or was part of where his brother lived. And then he decided, instead of cycling home, he would walk home. Michael saw a woman alone walking in front of him, and he followed her for a few minutes. He then said that he just lost control and attacked her. He pulled her into the grass. He said there was a struggle. He said that, she was struggling at first and then became quiet, but then again after a few minutes started to struggle again and ask him to stop. She had tried to scream, so he said he shoved grass into her mouth to stop her from being able to scream. He said that's all he really remembers until lights shone on him, at which point he obviously got up and legged it. He went back to his brother's and actually got his bicycle and then cycled home. He then had a lovely cup of tea when he got home and went to bed. In the written statement that he would make at his house after being cautioned, he said that he didn't know that the woman wasn't still alive when he left. So just this again kind of goes back to, like, perhaps she could have still been kind of, like, maybe she could have been saved. And with the couple going off, and I know they meant well, obviously, to go off and get the priest and a doctor and stuff. I don't know, but like, I think everybody in the world should know CPR, and one of them could have been able to stay and do something about it. Also, then I wonder what would have happened, like, if they had actually interrupted him in the first instance when they thought it was a courting couple. Like, she could still be alive if they, I don't know, if they had. Ireland was a very prudish place as well, so if you saw something like that happen, you probably weren't going to be really like, here, but I just think if they had intervened earlier, Catherine may have lived. After Manning gave his written statement at his house, he was brought to William Street Garda Station. The following day, he had visits from both his wife and his father. His wife, who was 2 months pregnant at the time of this attack, asked, did he do it? And he said, yeah, like I said, I confessed to doing it, I did it. Apparently this meeting only kind of took like 5 minutes, and then she left, but she kissed him before she left. Like he just said that he did it. His father, asked him, did he do it? And he said, yeah. And, he said, yeah, it was the drink. And his dad was disgusted. Like, his dad said, I've never been up for anything except for having no light. What I gather from that sentence, maybe you guys will get it quicker than I did, I think he meant as in, like, he's never been in trouble for anything in his life except for having no light. And I don't really know what that meant back then, to be honest. If you do know, let me know. He said, like, I've worked hard all my life for you children, and like now, like, you've disgraced me. Manning was then in court on the 20th of November. Apparently there was like 300 people, at the court to watch this, and he was kept on remand. Catherine's body was removed from Barrington's Hospital. Her colleagues made a guard of honour from the hospital out to the edge of Limerick City. There were hundreds in the procession. Her funeral was then in Killamare Church, and her body was laid to rest in Burn Cemetery. It was one of the largest funerals in the parish. The trial took place on the 15th of February 1954, and it lasted 3 days. By this point, Manning's wife is 7 months pregnant. There wasn't a lot of cross-examination because, the events of what had happened, like, was, it was established that, like, Michael Manning done what he done. There was a witness called Maureen Kelly who said that herself and 2 friends were had been out like visiting or something, and they were on their way back and they were walking, and they said that when they got to around Newcastle, they saw a man. They said that he was walking on the opposite side of the road to them, and that he was ahead of them, and then he slowed down, and then he was behind them, this type of thing, that he was acting really dodgy, like, and it was Michael Manning, and he was acting kind of real dodgy. And so what I reckon maybe there was that he, there was 3 of them, and they were younger than 65-year-old nurse that was on her own, and so he left them alone. The defence tried 2 different tactics. So the first one was that was insanity. So they had doctors testify that that there was a history of mental illness in Manning's family. He had had 2 uncles die in mental homes, as they were called, and that at the time of the trial he had a cousin in another mental home in Dublin. But the defense didn't bring any like psychiatrists or anything in, and so the judge actually commented on this and was that it wasn't a good enough reason, because these were just doctors, they weren't specialists in mental health, to try say that it was for a reason of insanity. And also it was kind of established that Michael Manning wasn't insane. The second argument was the drink. They basically said that he had had so much to drink, that he had had 8 drinks, but in like from like 1 till 8 or something like that, and that this has clouded his judgment, and that he'd done something that he wouldn't do normally. First thing is that his father actually testified that he wasn't drunk when he arrived at him at around 7ish. We know he had obviously had too much drink before, but obviously the traveling then and stuff would have taken the drink. Plus, drink is just not an excuse. Like, in my opinion, and in most people's opinion, I think drink is not an excuse to murder someone, to rape someone, to do anything. It's not an excuse. If anything, drink just lowers your inhibitions, which means it allows you to more likely do things that you want to do, that you shouldn't do, or that are not acceptable. The judge agreed with me, and he basically said that this wasn't a valid reason, because for drink to be like a valid excuse, it would have to have made him incapable of knowing like what he was doing was wrong, or that his actions would lead to this. But in his written statement, Michael Manning says that he shoved the grass into her mouth to stop her from screaming. So the judge tells the jury, so this is him showing that he knew that there was results from him doing that. The judge, Justice Murnahan, also said to the jury that they couldn't give the lesser charge of manslaughter, because even if he didn't intend to kill her, it was still murder, because his actions by using violence when he assaulted her, it led to her death, so it was murder. I agree, Judge, I agree. After just 3 hours deliberation, the jury found Michael Manning guilty of murder. Justice Murnahan actually said to the jury, if it's any consolation, I agree with you. We need more judges like that now. The judge then sentenced him to death by hanging. His wife made a petition for clemency against hanging, and this petition was actually signed by relatives of Catherine Cooper. Her brothers and sisters signed it, as far as I can see. So, I mean, maybe they knew that Catherine was such a compassionate woman, she was a nurse, and that she wouldn't have wanted the death penalty. It was rejected anyway. It was actually considered by the government twice, but they rejected it. Manning then tried to make a direct appeal to the Minister for Justice, Jerry Boland, and in it he tried to use, he was to be hanged around the time of Easter, so he tried to use this as like a reasoning, because again, holy Catholic Ireland, like Easter, I don't know, maybe Jesus wouldn't approve or something, but he also then had the audacity to say that by killing him, his wife wouldn't be able to cope, and with the baby, his wife wouldn't be able to cope, so that by hanging him, 3 lives were being taken. Funny, because he didn't have any sort of empathy for anybody else's life when he took Catherine Cooper's. And the thing here is, even if he didn't mean to take her life, he was still trying to do something horrific to her, which would change her life forever. So you didn't have any empathy for anybody else, so no one should have empathy for you. And to have the audacity to use your wife and unborn child as a reason to try to get out of being hung. Like today, one of the sources says Manning probably would have gotten the lesser charge of manslaughter because of the circumstances, and also apparently he had a low IQ, which was close to like a mental disability. But again, I'm sorry, low IQ or mental disability does not allow you to do horrific things like this. So I just don't have time to listen to that excuse. Again, his direct appeal was denied. And on the 20th of April 1954, Michael Manning was hanged. The executioner, Albert Pierrepoint, was brought over from England, which was all of our executions. The executioner from England came over to do. And so he was brought over. He was paid £5 plus expenses. He had actually done or carried out 435 executions in his career. And apparently either his dad or his uncle, different sources say different ones, was even like more prominent apparently, and was even a bigger executioner in England. The hanging was at 8 a.m. and shortly after this, a prison officer, put a notice on the door to say that he had been carried out, and that was kind of all that was done about it. There was no people there like to view it or any of that thing. And the following day, the Irish Times done a 2-paragraph piece on the execution, and that was it. His belongings were returned to his now widow. A few weeks later, she would actually give birth to his son. His wife Joan actually wrote a letter to the governor after this to thank him for, like, I don't know, being nice to Michael and, you know, all this jazz. And she said in it, you know, that she would you know, be with him in heaven, this type of thing. He raped and murdered a 65-year-old. He raped and murdered a pensioner. Get better standards. Find someone new. Manning was then buried in an unmarked grave in Mountjoy Prison. Michael Manning was the last person to be hanged in Ireland, and he was actually the only person to be hanged. So I know I mentioned it before in the video with Larry Griffin. The Free State was formed in 1922, and then our Republic was formed in 1949. So he was the only prisoner actually hanged since the country became the Republic of Ireland. And so he was the last as well. In 1964 then, the death penalty was abolished for all crimes apart from, like, you know, like capital offences, so against like the murder of a guard or like a government official, and like treason and stuff like that. And then in 1990 the death penalty was abolished altogether, but like no one was being hanged since then anyway for capital punishments. So yeah, that is the sad story of poor nurse Katie Cooper. You know, losing her life in such a savage way. Like I can't, like, this was a difficult case. And then, like, I would be against the death penalty, like in other countries and stuff. But for some reason, reading this, I was okay with the fact that Manning was hanged. I know I'm contradicting myself. I thought it would be an interesting case anyway, because obviously it has the aspect of it being, you know, the last man hanged here, but it's also a story I'd never heard of it before, and you know, Catherine deserves for to be remembered, for her story to be told. So yeah, thank you for watching and listening, and hopefully we will see you in the next video. Thanks.